The morning sun was just peeking through the clouds as the food rider pulled up to his tiny office. He'd been working for the local newspaper for nearly 15 years now, writing about everything from five-star restaurants to street food stalls. But today was different. Today, a plain white envelope waited on his desk. The writer, a man in his mid-40s with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, picked up the envelope. No return address, just his name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address and 3 words, TAO Farm. Investigate. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Another tip about food safety violations, probably. In his years of reporting, he'd seen it all. Kitchens crawling with cockroaches, meat left unrefrigerated for days, workers without proper hygiene. But something about this one felt different. After a quick search online, he learned that TAO Farm was a horse sausage factory in the countryside about 2 hours from the city. The company's website showed rolling green hills, beautiful horses grazing freely, and clean production facilities. Their slogan read, "Tradition, authenticity, originality." Horse sausage, he muttered to himself, leaning back in his creaky chair. While not common in many countries, horse meat was part of the traditional diet in this region. Still, it was controversial enough that most producers kept a low profile. The writer called the number listed on the website. A friendly woman answered and gave him the standard response, no, they didn't offer public tours. Company policy. Health regulations. Sorry. He tried again the next day, explaining he was a food journalist interested in traditional foods. Same answer, just more polite this time. 3 rejections later, his editor was losing patience. Either find another story or find a way in, she told him, not looking up from her computer. That night at home, as he stirred a pot of noodles for dinner, it clicked. The website had mentioned they were hiring seasonal workers for the upcoming busy period. If they wouldn't let him in the front door, he'd go through the side entrance. 2 weeks later, with a fake resume and his real ID, he couldn't bring himself to commit actual fraud. The writer found himself driving down a narrow country road toward TAO Farm. His backstory was simple, a city man looking for a change of pace, interested in traditional food production, not entirely untrue. The farm itself was even more impressive than the pictures. Sprawling green pastures stretched in every direction. Horses, healthy, strong animals with shining coats, grazed peacefully. The buildings were modern but designed to blend with the rural landscape. A tall man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands introduced himself as Mr. TAO, the owner. His eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to look right through the writer's disguise, but he just nodded and called over a supervisor to show the new hire around. This is the public area, the supervisor explained, gesturing to the main building, packaging facility and some of the fields. Very important to keep everything clean and professional for when buyers visit. The writer noticed security cameras at every corner. Workers moved with purpose, their faces serious and focused. When he asked innocent questions about the other buildings, the ones behind tall fences with keypad locks, the answers were vague. Storage. Equipment, not your department. At lunch in the staff cafeteria, the writer tried making conversation with other workers. They were friendly enough when talking about the weather or sports, but whenever he brought up the actual work processes or the restricted areas, they would suddenly remember urgent tasks elsewhere. By the end of his first day, the writer had seen enough of the public face of TAO Farm to write a flattering article about traditional food production in modern facilities. But he hadn't seen a single piece of meat being processed, not one sausage being made, and definitely not what happened to the horses after they left the picturesque fields. As he drove home, mud on his new work boots and more questions than answers swirling in his mind, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening at TAO Farm, it wasn't as simple as making sausages, and he was going to find out the truth no matter what. The food writer arrived for his second day at TAO Farm just as the sun was coming up. Other workers nodded at him as they punched in their time cards. He was no longer the new face, but he was far from being trusted. "You're with me today," said a stocky man with a graying beard. He introduced himself as the barn manager and handed the writer a pair of thick gloves. "Hope you're not afraid of horses." The writer followed him to the stables where dozens of horses were kept. Unlike the animals in the field, which he now realized were just for show, these horses had stories written in their bodies. Some limped slightly, Others had scars or patches of missing hair. These just came in yesterday, the barn manager explained, pointing to 3 new horses. They're from a racing track that closed down. The rider stroked the nose of a chestnut mare. Her eyes were gentle but weary, like she'd seen too much in her life. "What happens to them now?" he asked, his voice casual while his heart hammered in his chest. The barn manager shrugged. "That's not for us to decide. We just take care of them until the higher-ups make their choices." Throughout the morning, the rider mucked out stalls, filled water troughs, and helped check the horses for injuries or illness. The work was hard but straightforward. What wasn't straightforward was the way certain horses would disappear. "Where did the gray stallion go?" he asked during lunch break, trying to sound merely curious. A young stable hand glanced around before answering. "He got moved to the east facility." "And what's in the east facility?" The stable hand suddenly found his sandwich very interesting. "You ask too many questions for someone who's only been here 2 days." After lunch, the rider volunteered to deliver hay to the furthest barns, hoping to get a glimpse of the restricted areas. As he pushed the wheelbarrow down a long gravel path, he noticed a vehicle parked behind one of the buildings, a veterinary truck. Later that afternoon, as everyone was preparing to leave, he saw his chance. The security guard who monitored the fingerprint scanner at the door to the mysterious East Wing was distracted by a delivery. The rider slipped through behind a group of authorized workers, heart in his throat. Inside, the difference was immediate. The rustic farm atmosphere gave way to what looked like a high-tech medical facility. Through an open doorway, he saw something that made him freeze, a horse on an operating table, surrounded by people in scrubs. Before he could process what he was seeing, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. "You're not supposed to be here," said a stern voice. The rider turned to face Mr. TAO himself, the owner's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I got lost," the rider stammered. "No one gets lost through a fingerprint-secured door," Mr. TAO said quietly. "Who are you really working for? A competitor? An animal rights group?" The rider considered his options. Continuing the lie seemed pointless. "I'm a food journalist," he admitted. "I received a tip about this place." Something flashed across Mr. TAO's face, concern, maybe even fear. But it was quickly replaced by a calculated calmness. "A journalist," he repeated. "Here to write about our horse sausage factory." "Yes," the rider said, "but I'm starting to think there's more to this place than sausages." Mr. TAO studied him for a long moment. "There is," he finally said, "but it's not what you think." Instead of calling security, Mr. TAO led the rider to his office, a simple room with a desk covered in paperwork and veterinary journals. Family photos lined the walls. "Before I decide what to do with you," Mr. TAO said, "I want to know what you think is happening here." The rider chose his words carefully. "I think you're bringing in horses that no one wants anymore. Racing horses, work horses, old horses. But I don't think they're all becoming sausages." Mr. TAO's expression softened slightly. "You're observant. Good, but you've only seen a fraction of what we do here." He pressed a button on his desk phone. The rider arrived at the farm before sunrise, the gravel crunching under his tires in the pre-dawn quiet. Mr. TAO was already waiting for him, 2 steaming cups of tea in his weathered hands. "Drink," he said, handing one to the rider. "Today will be a long day." They walked in silence toward the east facility, their breath visible in the cool morning air. This time, Mr. TAO used his own fingerprint to open the door, then led the way inside. In the daylight streaming through high windows, the rider could now clearly see what he had only glimpsed yesterday. The facility was indeed medical, but nothing like he had imagined. Horses occupied large, comfortable stalls. Veterinarians and technicians moved between them, checking charts and administering medications. "This isn't a slaughterhouse," the rider said, unable to hide his surprise. Mr. TAO's laugh was short but genuine. "No, it's the opposite." A woman in a white coat approached them, clipboard in hand. Dr. Lin, the veterinarian Mr. TAO had mentioned yesterday, had kind eyes behind her glasses and moved with confident purpose. "This is our rehabilitation center," she explained, leading them through the facility. Most of these horses would have been sent to slaughter. Racing horses too slow to win, farm horses too old to work, riding horses with injuries their owners couldn't afford to treat. They stopped at a stall where a black horse with a twisted back leg was eating from a special raised feeder. "This is Thunder. He fell during a race," Dr. Lin said. "His owners were going to put him down, but we took him instead. The leg will never be perfect, but he's not in pain anymore." As they continued the tour, the rider saw dozens of similar cases, horses recovering from injuries, receiving physical therapy, even some being trained for new, less demanding jobs. "I don't understand," the rider finally said. "If this is a rescue operation, why the secrecy? Why pretend to be a sausage factory?" Mr. TAO led him to another building, smaller and separate from the rehabilitation center. Here, finally, was something that resembled a food production facility, though much smaller than the rider had expected. "Because we are also a sausage factory," Mr. TAO said simply, "just not the way you thought." He explained as they walked through the spotless processing rooms. "Horse meat has been part of our culture for generations. I don't believe there's shame in it when done with respect. But I also believe every animal deserves a good life and a purpose." The rider watched workers carefully preparing meat. The operation was small-scale but professional. "Where does the meat come from, if not the rescue horses?" Mr. Tao's face grew solemn. "Some horses can't be saved. They come to us too sick, too injured, or too dangerous because of past abuse. When we have no choice but to euthanize them, we use the meat rather than waste it." He showed the rider meticulous records. Each animal that provided meat had been humanely euthanized only after all treatment options were exhausted. "We also have agreements with other ethical farms that raise horses specifically for meat," Mr. Tao continued. "But the rehabilitation center is our real work. The sausage factory pays for it." Back in his office, Mr. Tao revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "We keep it secret because people misunderstand. They hear horse meat and rescue in the same sentence and assume the worst. We've had threats, vandalism. Easier to let people think we're just another meat producer." The rider sat back, mind racing. "So the tip I received?" "Probably from someone who knows only half the story," Mr. Tao said, "or from someone who wants to shut us down." By midday, the rider had seen everything: the full rehabilitation program, the limited meat production facility, even the adoption center where recovered horses were matched with new owners who promised never to sell them for slaughter. As they stood watching a young girl gentle a formerly abused pony, Mr. Tao turned to the rider. "Now you know our secret," he said quietly. "What will you do with it?" The rider watched the girl stroking the pony's nose, the animal's eyes now trusting, no longer afraid. Here was the real story. Not a scandal about a cruel sausage factory, but something far more complex and surprising. "I'm not sure yet," the rider answered honestly. "But I know it's not the story I thought I'd be telling." That evening, the rider sat at his kitchen table staring at his laptop screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The cursor blinked on a blank document. He'd started and deleted the first paragraph a dozen times. How do you tell a story when the truth is so different from what you expected? He sipped his cold coffee and thought back to his conversation with Mr. Tao after the tour. They'd walked to a small hill overlooking the entire farm property. "Why did you start this place?" the rider had asked. Mr. Tao had been quiet for a moment, watching a group of horses grazing peacefully in the distance. "I was a vet for 20 years before this," he finally said. "I worked with racehorses mainly. Beautiful animals trained to run until their bodies broke down. Then they'd be replaced, like old machines." The rider remembered how Mr. Tao's voice had grown softer, his eyes focused on something far away. "There was one horse, a bay stallion. His name was Lucky Star, though there was nothing lucky about him. He'd won races worth millions for his owner. Then he injured his leg. Not badly. He could have recovered with time and proper care." Mr. Tao had paused, his weathered face tight with old anger. "His owner didn't want to wait. He asked me to put Lucky Star down so he could collect the insurance money and buy a younger horse. When I refused, he found another vet who would do it." The rider took another sip of coffee, remembering the pain in Mr. Tao's eyes as he told the story. "That was your turning point," the rider had said. Not a question. Mr. Tao had nodded. "I quit the next day. Used all my savings to buy this land. Started with just 3 rescued horses and a dream of giving them somewhere safe to recover or live out their days. But the money ran out, the writer guessed. Faster than I expected, Mr. TAO had admitted. Caring for horses isn't cheap. Feed, medicine, staff. I nearly lost everything in the first year. That's when you started making sausages. Mr. TAO had smiled slightly. Actually, no, that came later. First, I almost gave up. Then my father, he was very old, very traditional, came to visit. He looked around and said, "Son, where I grew up, we didn't waste anything. Not even an animal's death." At his kitchen table, the writer opened a new document and began typing the story as Mr. TAO had told it to him. How Mr. TAO's father had reminded him that in their culture, horse meat had been eaten for centuries. How using the meat from horses that couldn't be saved could honor their lives while helping fund the rescue of others. It felt right, Mr. TAO had explained. The horses that couldn't be saved would help save others. A full circle. The small sausage operation had started with just local customers. Traditional recipes, high quality, complete transparency about the source. It had grown slowly but steadily. People appreciated the honesty, Mr. TAO had said, and the quality. As profits increased, the rehabilitation center expanded. More horses were saved. Some returned to lighter work. Others became therapy animals. Many lived out their natural lives in the pastures of TAO farm. The writer typed faster now, the story flowing through him. He wrote about the careful records Mr. TAO kept, which horses were rescued, which were rehabilitated, which were adopted, and which few were humanely euthanized when there were no other options. He described the small but growing network of ethical horse meat farmers who supplied additional meat for the sausage operation, all committed to giving their animals good lives and humane endings. Around midnight, the writer sat back and read what he'd written. It wasn't the expose that he'd expected to write. It was something more complicated, more nuanced. A story about finding unexpected solutions to difficult problems. About honoring both life and death. He saved the document and closed his laptop. Tomorrow he would show his draft to Mr. TAO. There were still questions to answer, details to verify. But one thing was certain, the real story of TAO Farm wasn't a scandal about a cruel sausage factory. It was a story about a man who had found a way to save horses by honoring those he couldn't save. The next morning, the writer returned to TAO Farm with his draft article. The familiar gravel driveway now felt different, less mysterious, more like coming back to a place he was beginning to understand. Mr. TAO welcomed him with a nod and led him to the small office. Tea was already waiting, the steam rising from 2 simple cups. "I wrote something," the writer said, sliding his laptop across the desk. "I'd like you to read it." As Mr. TAO read, his expression changed from worry to surprise and finally settled into something like cautious hope. He finished reading and looked up. "You told the truth," he said simply. "Yes, but not in the way I expected." Mr. TAO closed the laptop and pushed it back. "You didn't make us look like heroes or villains." The writer shook his head. "Because you're neither. This place, what you do here, it's complicated. Like most real things in life." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping tea. Then the writer spoke again. "I have a problem though. My editor wanted a scandal. Secret footage, shocking revelations, that kind of story sells papers. This," he gestured at the laptop, "this is different." Mr. TAO leaned forward, his weathered hands wrapped around his teacup. "Will they publish it?" "I don't know," the writer admitted. "And there's something else I need to ask you, something that's been bothering me." He took a deep breath. "If what you're doing is ethical, and I believe it is, why all the secrecy? The locked doors, the fake front, the fingerprint scanners. Why not just be open about everything?" Instead of answering immediately, Mr. TAO stood up. "Let me show you something." They walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the office. Mr. TAO unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were photos of spray-painted walls, broken windows, frightened horses, news clippings about protests and threats, police reports. "This happened 3 years ago," Mr. TAO explained, his voice heavy. "When we first started. We were completely open then, rescue center and meat production side by side. We thought people would understand." The writer flipped through the documents, his stomach sinking. They didn't. Some did. Most didn't bother to learn the whole story. They heard horse meat and decided we were monsters. Mr. TAO pointed to a photo of a young woman with a bandaged arm. One of my staff was attacked in town. After that, I decided to separate everything. Keep the rescue work private. Let people see only what they could understand. The writer nodded slowly. The pieces were fitting together. The security measures, the divided facility, the careful control of information. It's safer this way, Mr. TAO continued. For the horses, for my people. The rescues happen quietly. The meat production follows all regulations. Everyone wins. He paused. At least, that was what I thought until you showed up asking questions. The writer closed the folder, his mind racing with new questions. What responsibility did he have to this place now? To the horses? To the truth? Your article, Mr. TAO said, interrupting his thoughts. If you publish it, everything changes. People will know. Some will understand, some won't. Are you asking me not to publish it? Mr. TAO shook his head. No. I'm asking you to understand what's at stake. This isn't just about exposing a secret. It's about the futures of these horses, these people who work here. They walked out of the office and stood watching the morning activity of the farm. Workers moved between stalls. Veterinarians checked on patients. In the distance, rehabilitated horses grazed peacefully. What will happen if everyone knows the truth? The writer asked. Mr. TAO looked out over his farm, squinting slightly in the morning sun. That depends on how you tell the story. The writer felt the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had come looking for a simple expose. Instead, he'd found a complex ethical question with no easy answers. I need time to think, he said finally. Mr. TAO nodded. Take all the time you need. The horses will still be here. For 3 days, the writer didn't return to TAO farm. He sat in coffee shops, walked through city parks, and stayed at his ceiling late at night, wrestling with what to do. His editor had called twice, asking for the expose she expected. I need more time, was all he said. On the 4th morning, he woke up with a clear head and a decision. He drove to TAO farm without calling ahead. The farm was busier than usual. A truck was parked by the rehabilitation center, and people were carefully unloading 3 thin, nervous horses. The writer spotted Mr. TAO directing the operation and stood back watching. Each horse was treated with gentle care, spoken to softly, given time to adjust to its new surroundings. One of them, a dappled gray with a badly healed leg, kept tossing its head and rolling its eyes in fear. Mr. TAO approached this horse himself, speaking in a low, steady voice. He didn't touch the animal, just stood nearby, letting it get used to his presence. After several minutes, the horse stopped tossing its head and reached out cautiously to sniff Mr. TAO's hand. It was only then that Mr. TAO noticed the writer. You came back, he said, walking over once the horses were safely inside. I did, the writer replied, and I've made a decision about the article. Mr. TAO's face remained carefully neutral. Would you like to talk in my office? No, the writer said. I'd rather talk here, where it all happens, where the real work is done. They walked to a bench near the rehabilitation center. In the distance, horses grazed peacefully in green pastures. Closer by, workers moved between buildings with purpose. I'm going to tell the whole story, the writer said finally. The rescue work, the rehabilitation, and yes, the sausage production. All of it. Mr. TAO stiffened slightly. I see. But I'm not writing an expose, the writer continued. I'm writing about the complexity of what you've created here. The difficult balance you found between cultural traditions and animal welfare. The way you've turned something most people see as only sad, the end of a horse's life, into something that helps other horses live better. Relief flickered across Mr. TAO's face, quickly replaced by caution. And the secrecy, the security measures. I'll explain why they were necessary, the attacks, the threats. The writer looked directly at Mr. TAO. But I think it's time for secrets to end. I think you've created something here that people should know about, the whole truth, not just part of it. Mr. TAO was quiet for a long time, looking out over his farm. Finally, he spoke. When I started this place, I wanted to be completely open. I believed people could understand complexity if we explained it well, he sighed. After the attacks, I lost that belief. It was easier to hide, to separate the parts people might not understand. And now, the writer asked. Now I'm not sure. Your article will change things, one way or another. I want to do it right, the writer said firmly. I want to spend more time here. Interview your staff, your veterinarians. Follow the whole process from rescue to rehabilitation to, when necessary, processing. I want to understand everything so I can help others understand too. Mr. TAO studied him carefully. And if people still don't understand? If they react with anger instead of thought? The writer had considered this question during his sleepless nights. Then at least the truth will be out there for those who are willing to see it. And I'll stand by what I've written. A slight smile touched Mr. TAO's lips. You've changed since you first came here. The story changed me, the writer admitted. Could stories do that? Mr. TAO looked back at the rehabilitation center where the new horses were being settled into their stalls. The dappled grey was now calmly eating from a feed bucket, its earlier fear subsiding in the face of gentle care. All right, Mr. TAO said finally. No more secrets. We'll show you everything. Ask your questions. Take your photos. Write your story. He extended his hand. But promise me one thing. The writer took the offered hand. What's that? Promise you'll write the truth, not what will sell papers, not what people want to hear. The real truth with all its difficult parts. I promise, the writer said and meant it. 2 weeks later, the writer sat in his editor's office, watching her face as she finished reading his article. Outside the window, the city bustled with morning traffic, unaware of the story that might soon change how they saw a farm on its outskirts. The editor put down the last page and looked up, her expression unreadable. This isn't what I asked for, she said finally. The writer nodded. I know. You were supposed to get hidden camera footage, shocking revelations, something that would sell papers. She tapped the stack of papers. Instead, you've written this. The truth, the writer said simply. A complex truth about ethical choices, cultural traditions, and finding unexpected solutions to difficult problems. The editor leaned back in her chair. It's good writing, really good, but it's not what our readers expect. Maybe that's exactly why they should read it. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The writer waited, heart beating a little faster than normal. He'd spent 2 full weeks at TAO farm, documenting everything. The careful rehabilitation of injured horses, the gentle care of animals that couldn't be saved, the respectful processing that followed. He'd interviewed veterinarians, stable hands, even former owners who had surrendered their horses to the farm. The result was not a sensational exposé, but a thoughtful exploration of a place that defied simple labels. If we don't publish it, the writer said finally, I'll take it elsewhere. The editor raised an eyebrow. You feel it strongly about it. I do. She sighed, then nodded slowly. Fine, we'll run it this weekend. Front page of the Sunday magazine. But I want good photos, not shocking ones, but ones that show what you've described. The care, the complexity. Can you get those? The writer smiled for the first time that morning. Already have them. 3 days later, the article hit newsstands and online platforms. The surprising truth inside the horse sausage factory spread quickly, first locally, then beyond. The reaction was immediate and mixed, just as Mr. TAO had feared. Some readers were outraged at the idea of horses being used for meat, regardless of the circumstances. Online comment sections filled with angry reactions from people who clearly hadn't read past the headline. But others did read the full story. Veterinary associations praised the farm's rehabilitation work. Cultural heritage groups highlighted the respectful continuation of food traditions. Animal welfare experts began debates about whether TAO Farm's model might actually be more ethical than many standard practices. A week after publication, the writer returned to TAO Farm. The entrance had changed. A new sign clearly identified both the rehabilitation center and the small-scale processing facility. A group of visitors was being given a tour of the public areas. Mr. TAO met him by the stables, looking tired but resolute. Your article changed everything, he said, offering a handshake, just like you said it would. They walked together past the stalls where horses in various stages of recovery watched them with curious eyes. "We've had some threats," Mr. TAO admitted, "but also support. 3 other farms have contacted us about our rehabilitation methods. A university wants to study our model, and donations have started coming in for horses that need expensive treatments." They stopped at a familiar stall. Inside was the dappled gray horse that had arrived so frightened just weeks before. Now it came to the gate willingly, nudging Mr. TAO's hand for treats. "The hardest thing," Mr. TAO said as he stroked the horse's nose, "is helping people understand there are no perfect solutions in this world. Only better ones and worse ones. Choices made with care and respect, or choices made without thinking." The rider nodded, watching the gentle interaction. Was it worth it, coming out into the open? Mr. TAO thought for a moment. Ask me again in a year. But for now, yes. Living with secrets was its own kind of burden. As they continued their walk, a small girl and her father approached the fence where rehabilitated horses grazed in the sunshine. The rider watched as the girl reached out tentatively to offer a carrot to a gentle old mare. "The article didn't fix everything," the rider said. "Some people will never understand or accept what happens here." "True," Mr. TAO agreed. "But now they have the chance to try. And that's all I ever wanted, for people to see the whole picture, not just the parts that are easy to understand." The rider looked out over the farm, seeing it now not as a place of mystery and suspicion, but as something rare and valuable, a place where difficult truths were faced with courage and compassion. "That's all any of us can ask for," he said quietly. "The chance to be seen and understood, even the complicated parts, especially the complicated parts."